Welcome to Mana's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 15, The Half-Elf Godkin. The Dark Elf Village in the Great Sea of Trees. It was no different from the Elf Village. For example, the race called the Wild Elves were once ordinary elves. Shifting their sphere of living to the grassland produced changes not only in the form of the culture, but also physically, to the extent that at present they had been recognized as a new species. So the reason that physical or magical changes had not occurred in Dark Elves was because on top of being the same race as elves from the start, they were living in the same environment. There were also hardly any differences in culture, and their way of life was centered on the elf trees. Hence, the classes they gained were, just like with the elves, mainly ranger and druid. The differences were just skin color, forms of animal repellent, and other trivial customs at best. In Dark Elf villages, they used an animal repellent that produced its avoidance effect by using sense. The Dark Elves were taught this precious bit of wisdom by the treants and other inhabitants of the forest where they were living before moving to the Great Sea of Trees. Potent smelling herbs were planted around the village, created and spread around a special drug that repelled animals, and, although their powers had to be considerably divided between duration and area of effect, used druidic magic. This method was also effective in the Great Sea of Trees, and compared to other elf villages excluding the royal capital, the Dark Elf villages were safe. However, the elves did not know of this method. If it were to spread, the avoidance effect produced by sense would drop. Magical beasts as well as other animals may seem stupid, but that was not so. On the contrary, if they learned that food was at the other end of that smell, the danger level would rise. For those reasons, then even if they were taken in by their kinfolk, they couldn't readily teach them this method. However, on that day, the Dark Elves, believing in their own safety, would learn they were on thin ice. The violent roar could be heard from far away. This was a regular occurrence in the Great Sea of Trees. Whether it be in the glow of sunrise or late at night, there were no days when the voices of the animals could not be heard. Moreover, there were species that, despite being small in body, had howls that would surprise you. Hearing a single roar didn't mean that something was happening. The howls were certainly frightening. There were various species of magical beasts that could put special powers into their roars. Those who heard them would become frightened, confused, lose the will to fight, and occasionally, there were some that could even cause exhaustion. But if it were heard from a distance, then even that special ability wouldn't manifest. A single distant roar had no connection to danger, and should have been a very typical occurrence in the landscape. However, that day, one Dark Elf man called for everyone to be on guard. The man's height wasn't outside of the average range for a Dark Elf. However, his long, slender and supple limbs, his lively yet efficient movements made you feel like there was a power hidden inside them, easily made the man appear bigger than his actual height. His refreshing looks were well proportioned, and even within the village, he was very popular with the ladies. There was no one among the Dark Elves living in the Great Sea of Trees who didn't know this man. A first-rate ranger who had accumulated vast amounts of experience, bearing the ancient and honorable surname of House Blueberry, one of the 13 families of the beginning that became the central figures during the Great Migration. In his hands, the man Blueberry Agnia held a Dark Elf-style compound bow, of which there were only a handful even in this village. It was a bow one would not be permitted to use unless they had earned an extremely good score at the archery tournament held in the season when the Becco of Flowers bloomed once every 3 years. Obeying Agnia's call, the Dark Elf soldiers assembled immediately. Although they were called soldiers, they were rangers that had not gone out to hunt, not full-time soldiers. The village where Angel lived was the largest Dark Elf village in the vicinity. And yet, there were only about 200 residents, and they had no leeway to put full-time warriors in place. In front of his friends who had assembled with puzzled looks appearing on their faces, Agnia moved his ears slightly while focusing on the distant sounds. He announced in a stiff voice, "There's no other reason I deliberately had you all assemble. That roar just now. I have heard it once before. That is the roar of an adult, a fully matured one, at that, Ursus." Agnia sensed all those assembled immediately became tense. It was obvious as to why. If you were a Dark Elf living in this forest, even if it were a child, there would be none who did not know the name of the one magical beast that should be feared the most, Ankylosis. In the area around this village, there were a number of species of monsters, whose danger level was high, but the Ankylosus was the one at the top of that list. Maybe it would be possible if it were an Ursus cub, but it wasn't an exaggeration to say that attacking an adult, a fully grown adult at that, meant death. It had armor that repelled even arrows, and physical strength that could easily bisect a Dark Elf. Furthermore, due to all of its physical abilities being high, running away from them was considerably difficult. It was a truly terrifying monster. I certainly did hear some kind of roar, but did it really belong to Ankylosis? Are you sure you didn't mishear it? One dark elf woman asked doubtfully. One of the 3 vice masters of the hunt, and a skilled ranger who held a composite bow just like Agnia's in her hands. It seemed that even she couldn't tell just from that roar whether or not it was Ankylosis. Moreover, a cute bird called the howling bird, for example, could imitate the roars of various species of monsters. And there were other animals in this forest, with abilities similar to this. With those kinds of animals inhabiting the forest, identifying the owner from a single, distant howl was extremely difficult. Her question was a reasonable one. However, Agnia was the greatest ranger in this forest. He surpassed everyone, not just in his skill with the bow, but also in the sharpness of his senses, and even in his ability to analyze the information those senses picked up. Her question was not out of any distrust of Agnia. It came from her more than half wishing for this to please be a mistake. It's very unfortunate, but there's no doubt. No matter how much time passes, it's impossible for me to forget that roar that makes your hair stand on end, that makes you feel the overwhelming difference in strength. Even now it's still stuck in my ears. It's not something that I could mishear. The next to speak was the master of the hunt. The pillars of authority in the village were the master of the hunt, the council of elders, the chief pharmacist, and the right master. The council of elders was composed of 3 people, so altogether there were 6 people. Meaning he was one of them. There wasn't a composite bow in his hands. His specialty, if anything, was trapping, but even if you took that out of the equation, his abilities were far behind those of Agnia. Be that as it may, as a ranger, there was no doubt that he was influential, and though he was younger than Agnia, he had a cool and collected personality, a person with nothing to criticize as master of the hunt. A mature is howling, so we can confirm that something has entered his territory. In most cases, it would roar when fighting a strong enemy or a hostile member of its own kind. Otherwise, it was when it was announcing a victory or declaring its territory, or also when it was breeding. However, whichever of those it was highly likely that someone had entered the Ursus territory. Because once an Ankyloursus established its territory, the territory expanded as its body grew. It would very rarely try to change it, and it was also very rare for it to go hunting outside of it. Therefore, it was reasonable to think that someone had entered its territory. Ha! What a nuisance. I don't know just what monster went inside it. I hope that the careless fools who disturbed the peace end up as the Ursus' prey. The dark elves all around him agreed with the master of the hunt's complaint. Agnia gave a wry smile to those friends. Given the Ankylosis' disposition, as long as they didn't thoughtlessly provoke it, it was a well-known fact that it could become the neighborhood balancer, in a sense. I will agree with that opinion, but we don't know whether or not it's even entered the territory yet. Yes. When I heard the Ursus roar before, it was when 2 of them were fighting. And the fight that time was being held outside of his territory. Excuse me, Agnia-san, I have a question. I hardly heard it at all, but since you mentioned it, I do think it's true that an Ursus roared. But its territory is fairly separated from here, right? So why did you call us all here? Yes, I don't know if something happened to the Ursus, but it's a fact that some situation is occurring that is making it roar. Maybe it's changing its territory, or maybe the ruler of that territory is changing. Or maybe something even more different is occurring. For example, that's right. After taking a breath, Agnia continued and said, such as a powerful magical beast that is able to escape from the Ursus even though it lost, and is heading this way. So, we should simultaneously put the village on guard for anything that could happen, and even if it's tomorrow, we head in the direction of the roar and get a glimpse of the state of the forest. Everyone present agreed. It would be problematic if they did not quickly sense changes in the forest and share information. It was extremely important to those who lived by receiving the blessings of the forest. Today's hunt is cancelled. Maybe it would be safer to stop anyone from going into the forest altogether, let alone for hunting. We still have food, right? We're fine. We bagged some huge game lately. But even so, we should still tell the right master what is going on right away, so we can have him start making fruit. We don't know how many days it'll take until we finish confirming if everything's safe, after all. After that, right? We should also talk to the elders about that. We'll have the elders devise a way to disseminate the information to everyone, so that someone who doesn't know what's going on doesn't go into the forest. Prompted by Agnia's call for attention, everyone exchanged opinions. Nobody said, "You're overthinking it." The forest brought blessings, but it also suddenly threw misfortune your way. Stacking precaution on top of precaution without overlooking the slightest ill omen was crucial to living in the sea of trees. They should quickly make it known that there was a possibility the forest was deteriorating. What should we do about the other villages? Should we contact them once we've gotten some grasp on the situation? Or should we quickly tell them that we're facing this kind of situation? I can sense that both of those are correct, but I also think they might be wrong. Why don't we leave just all the decisions about that up to the elders? Hey, just hold on a minute, we should consolidate our opinions. If we present it as the opinion from the majority, it'll come in handy in winning the argument, when those hard-headed old farts start proposing we do something weird. Calling them old farts is going too far, Ganon. Certainly, they can be inflexible at times, but in their own way, the elders have abundant experience. We're just choosing a path that can be considered even safer by benefiting from their wisdom. One of the vice masters of the hunt, Plum Ganon, was rebuked by the master of the hunt. That Ganon, red-faced, tried to start loudly talking, but his mouth was covered by Agnia's hand. That's about enough out of you. Considering what I called everyone together for, talk about what we need to do right now. You know well enough the threat Ankylosis poses, don't you? Knowing that Ganon had shut his mouth, Agnia removed his hand.